We're going to go over your whole portfolio, and then we'll go through it piece by piece. And then looking through it with the goals you have in mind, I think we'll come up with some good ideas moving forward with this. First thing, your work is awesome. It's perfectly geared towards a children's book audience. You say your target audience is ages 6 through 10, and you're nailing that really well. I think the trick with middle schoolers is they still have a lot of need for children's book illustrations, but they want to think that they're grown-ups. I think your work has enough of that whimsy to fit for them, but also a sense of the mysterious, which is also a key element to have. You're really good at expression and mood and conveying emotion with your characters. And I don't just mean expression in the face, I mean in the whole figure, the body, the setup. You're also really good with color. You have a really intelligent and grounded way to use color. It's based on making pop colors of the complementaries and really making those shine. Your colors are very good and safe for a children's publishing setting. I think what we'll talk about is how you can expand that further, how you can get more precise with it, and how you can expand on what you have and incorporate more into background, environment, get that to the next level. In your artist statement, you bring up a question that I think is very common that's not often talked about. You've worked hard as an illustrator for over 8 years now, and you feel and see successes in your work, and yet you're feeling a sense of stagnation, you say, and that you want to take it to the next level. What you talk about in your artist statement is that you want to emphasize humor and subtext in images more. You're succeeding in some already, but in a lot of these, it could be pushed further. I want you to start examining the use of story and the narrative involved to support that humorous setting. I think it's all relative. A figure that is standing there with no relation to the environment doesn't hit the same notes as far as humor goes as something that's playing with that situation, playing with the circumstances and making a story unfold, even if it's not the main story that your image is telling. Overall, I love your style, but knowing when to use clarity and diversity in texture will really help to strengthen and add emphasis and a focal point. Especially when you're dealing with a children's book audience, you want the focal point to be clear. You want to show the viewers where to go and where to look, but then also give them secrets that they can follow. But the trick is you don't want that to distract from the main takeaway. Readers, kids, and parents alike should be able to identify the image and the main focal point right when they look at it. You want to make gifts that keep on giving. You get the idea right off the bat, but there's more to explore as you look. For Kidlit, while space for text is important, environment and background cannot be neglected. I think that's something that would really help tie everything together. Not just the technique that you can build, but also how to build humor and narrative into these images. Vignette is important and it's good to know, and it's good that you have examples of it, but I think that's the way to push that work to the next level. A lot of these are wonderful characters and wonderful expressions, but they're all one-offs. I'd love to see them repeated. I'd love to see these characters exploring in different scenarios, different situations with different moods and expressions. The character is just so charming. The expressions in the face and the pose is stellar in each and every one. I think to make it easier to translate, bringing in consistency of the character throughout. For every other iteration of the character, there is that combination of the pale bluish gray and the red. Now for the doctor, that is not only introducing a new color to the palette, but it's removing the colors that we have been using to identify this character. While we still know it's the character, how do you incorporate that same color scheme into it? In the painter on the bottom left, look at that solid background. Problem is that none of the others really has a fulfilled background. The scientist and explorer has a really good one. The keyboard player has a really good one as well. But this one, it's fleshed out using the whole composition to work for you. If you combined this with some of the elements you're showing in the cat and the piano, you're using a different value structure. You're using hierarchy to show what's important. So in the name, that inclusion of white is such a wonderful little element. What if someone that was included in the little microbes and the bacteria that are in the scientific explorer in the center? There is a way to push it too far. For example, for the traditional dancer, I think if you use the red to make the curtains red, that would be too much. It's going too far. This nice tone shading that you have for the ribbon dancer, that could take it to the next level. Excellent color. The technique, The execution of the medium is really terrific. The character and the world building are so satisfying. I genuinely want to learn more about this. I want to enter that world. It's tricky to do for children's literature where it's a safe, welcoming, and mysterious place. So you should be really proud of how you've done that with this piece. The weakest point is that there's not enough contrast or saturation difference. I'm speaking in between the foreground, middle ground, and background. There is some nice areas behind this main figure of those darkest darks. And then you have this rich blue of the rabbit hood, and then that dark hair framing the face. And that is awesome. That's very smart, and you're really bringing focus and attention to that. However, as we get back here, everything stays in the same realm of midtones. There are a couple areas of darks, a couple areas of brights, but overall I think it's very balanced and visually confusing going forward with that. You have to limit yourself. You have to show your viewers what to focus on and leave some secrets for them to follow. You have wonderful things in here, thread and needles, another rabbit figure with the teapot, which is beautifully rendered, by the way. You're doing all those things to show scale, to show more about the world. It's about how to push it back, how to make it not the focal point, not to compete with the focal point, but still show that world. Where it's going really well back here, where this is sort of fading, it's losing a lot of its clarity. When you compare this area to the area of the face and how you're using clarity and definition to show what's the focal point and what's in the foreground. It gets competitive in areas like this. This is a very bright highlight. This is a very rich red. This rich red we see here and here, definitely here, and it's popping up in the flowers. Now there's no real decrease in saturation or in tone between those reds, so it's a little chaotic for our eye. And it does move us through the page, but think of it almost like volume of a note. If that red is a musical note, you don't want it to be the same volume at different areas. It's going to be louder up front and get quieter in the back. You still want it, it unifies the color scheme, but working on getting it a little less developed and explained. Overall, I think lower the highlights a little bit because it's a little competitive with the front character. This nice fading into the shadow in the background. Even if digitally you just surround that, lower the contrast a little bit, I think that would help. It's funny where the color is technically good. Part of it is the birds. For the birds, with all three of them, you have this one that's almost fading into the black background with a little bit of light. This one catching a lot of detail, a lot of wonderful highlights from the glowing, and then this one which is catching the tail end of those highlights on its wing. And those are framing this image compositionally in a really nice way. And color-wise, they're working, but in a good, nice and subtle way, where it is still the blues and the yellows and a little bit of oranges playing with each other. Red and green are complementary colors, and you're using that well. But there's something that's happening in this one that happened in this piece as well, where you're using those punchy areas of red, I think, in too many places. So instead of being a focal point, it's scattered throughout here and in the eyes and nose and the feet and the mushrooms. I think this mushroom in particular, look at how it's bright, it's saturated, and it stands out against this shadow. So all of those things together make this mushroom really pop and stand out. And I want my eye to explore this figure and the rabbit and the environment and all of the birds, and yet my eye keeps going back here. That's a good example, the dangers of having too much of a focal point in many places. Know when to tone back. Keep in mind what you want the most important part to be. This little mushroom here, it's a little more toned back, and that little snail on the top is that excellent little secret to include. Because when I say limit yourself, I don't mean don't put in all these wonderful elements you have. I'm not saying remove those things. I'm saying know how to set up that hierarchy. This piece is so cute. I love these little pirate pigs. They're adorable. And this one who just took off his pirate shirt and is just, yeah, I'm just happy to be here, showing off his tattoos. With the vignettes, I want more environment. Excellent emphasis on humor. I love the characters. Her teeth are wonderful. I love the pig-like nose. It's really making a bond between her and the characters. With the pigs, you have good expressions. Look at even in these three, the expressions are wonderful. Between all four, you have a lot of good size difference, but that's about it. The same shirt pattern. Now I get that it's like a uniform. They're pirates, they got the tattoos. What if some had earrings? What if one had glasses? What if one had a peg leg even? I don't know if that's the way you want to go with it, but a little bit more diversity in them beyond their size and expression. This is one of where the color is working really well, and I love it because it's a little more subtle. Now again, with this one, yes, we got like the red and the green, and that technically works, but it's a little punchy, it's a little in your face. Whereas this one, those oranges and blues are playing really nicely, and you take it a step further. You have this nice purple dress and crown with the brown of the heart. And the big thing with color, brown is technically a yellow. With this whole piece, you have the orange and the blues and the yellow and the purples playing really nicely. Let's go back to the first image. Such a strong environment is made in this bottom left image. And imagine if you took that further by adding a little bit of tone into that to flesh it out more, adding some highlights here and there, but not so much that it distracts from the main figure. For these two, the environment is becoming a little distracting, and I think it's about how to make those work well. That's a really challenging next step. I think this is one of the best pieces in your portfolio here, not just with the current execution, but also with your future goals. Let's start with that. In your idea of you want to emphasize that humor, this one does it in spades, and it's a gift that keeps on giving. Initially, you look at it and the cat making the cake is a funny concept. It's a funny image. But you have more to explore, the gift that keeps on giving as you see, and you're realizing how precarious the cake is. And it's really funny to keep looking at. This ties into why I think the background is important. The background will help you emphasize the humor in those elements. Say, for instance, the cat was just making this tall cake. It would not be as successful as if these background elements of the two chairs stacked on top of each other were included. That's doing a really good job to help emphasize this piece and the humor therein. When I mentioned before of using line and clarity to bring in more focus into areas, I think that could be really used well to bring out that expression in the cat's face. I really love the shapes and the color you're having. This is another one where your use of the spot color is a little haphazard. Let's look back at this one where those reds are kind of hopping up all over the place and there's no sense of order between them. This one, similarly, it's that same punchy red throughout, minimal degrees of change. In fact, the areas where it's going the most successfully are like here, where that red's a little bit more toned down in comparison to her boots. Cover the lighthouse with your thumb. You need that red there. You need it to frame it. But when it's that loud and that punchy, it competes with the boots and the rest of the image. But this is a great example of how incorporation of environment lends to the humor. Imagine if this chaotic ocean storm was gone and this girl was just sitting there with the umbrella reading a book. That's a charming image. It's a beautiful image, well rendered, but that's it. There's no humor to it. Now here, it's this almost funny situation of a girl just standing by the seaside reading. Keep in mind areas where you're succeeding in what your goals are and follow those breadcrumbs into how to incorporate humor better into your work. This is another one of your more successful pieces, I think. It's such a good use of color. Look at how the little spots of red make this circle that guide our eye through it. By the way, it is very smart you having this little bit of peachy red on the pear the boy is grabbing. I think you should just include that into the other pears as well. Honestly, I just looked like a bird at first glance. If they're more unified like that, it has this beautiful way to keep us in this composition. You're using contrast and focal point really, really well. Look at how you have this dark shadow on the fence, which grounds the whole image. Now it also is a good contrast to the chicken, which stands out against it. That chicken is not the brightest point in the image. That award goes to the girl's hair in contrast to the ribbons, her face, and that big open red mouth. So you see how in comparing that chicken, even though it stands out with this contrast, it is not hierarchically more important for the viewer than the girl eating the pear. And it's very smart how you did that, and it's very well done. It's also a good example of how you have a good variation of texture throughout. Look at that haphazard, almost scratching to make the feathers on the chicken, the great line work fading into the shadow, this negative space of the grass against the fence, the fabrics, all these squiggles that look almost like handwriting on the fence is really terrific. I think they are handwriting. I gotta say, it is an excellent vignette. And what if it was not a vignette? That might be a good challenge for you, actually, where this piece is very successful. But put those characters in another image and then incorporate a background into them. And use your strength in these vignettes and your knowledge of negative space. For example, if this fence was against a plain field and a clear blue sky, well, not blue, I'd say grayish sky with their color palette. But if it was a clear sky and a plain field, that's still a background. You're still incorporating it. You have to compete for the attention. This image is a great character, but it's a good opportunity to push it more. So you're doing all the things you do really well. The shape, the color, the pose, the expression, all of these are great. Think of how you can use the costume for the sense of humor and use the setting for the sense of humor. You should check out movies by Jacques Tati, very tongue-in-cheek and physical humor that's very much in line with children's book work. That could be really informative for how setting, environment, and character combine to make humor. Now, the funniest parts of this, the scarf is just really big, really tightened around him. The coat is clearly too small, but beyond that, there's not much going on with it. Let's say we add an environment. What if this bear was in a library? What would people's reactions to that be? His costume is a little all over the place, where you're bundled up for winter with these nice homey knitwear, but then it's also very posh, you got the stopwatch, you got a nice umbrella, and the jacket is ill-fitting and comically tight, but the pants seem to fit him pretty well. Think about how you can push and pull those things. What if the glasses were too small or too big? What if the pants were way too small and had comical suspenders? To play with the scarf and the hat, what if he was bundled up in winter wear and the setting was he was just reading a book before hibernation? These are all those questions of how you can push, as you say in your artist statement, the humor and the subtext within the piece to go further than it is. This piece is another very successful one of yours. It's a stellar example of your style. It's using humor really, really well. By the way, I am assuming that this is Hagrid in Harry Potter. If it is not, then it looks a lot like Hagrid in Harry Potter. I will be using those names for this. This little Harry is almost invisible next to this massive figure. You're using it really smart with color, where Harry's hair and face and his pants, very similar to Hagrid, and they kind of blend in. The only thing to even let us know he's there is the blue. But wait, you're not just leaving just a little spot of blue there, you're also having a hint of it in the umbrella, which is very, very smart, where he is hidden in plain sight, and it's really, really nicely done. Humor-wise, beyond just the scale, these tiny little teacups and the tiny teapot, and having the lightest light and the darkest dark contrast, really bringing them in, is wonderful. It's all about that image we can see time and time again with children's books, where the parent is reading it, the kid is reading over their shoulder. Not parent, it could be the guardian or a friend or a family member. They're reading it, the kid reading over their shoulder, and the kid points out, hey, look at that small little teapot. Oh, did you notice that? And those are the kind of secrets you want to include. It's got to have a background. This is one where if you want to explore these characters more, which I think would be a good exercise, think of how you could expand on that humor by having them in a space. What if the door frame only came up to Hagrid's elbows? Really emphasizing his largeness to add into that humor. And this piece to close on is excellent texture, diversity throughout, and the negative space are so well done. I love this handwriting-esque texture that you have in this one. The speckling, the spots, this fading, this just chaotic hatch-making, beautiful mark-making in the tree. The negative space created throughout this is wonderful. This is a great example of how important setting and a comparison is. Where right now, this house is a wonderful character in and of itself, but where is it? Is it on a deserted lane? Is this a spooky haunted house in the neighborhood? Is this in the middle of a suburban neighborhood and it's the angst of all of the white picket fence neighbors who wish that it was a little more tidy? That setting really puts this into perspective. I want to give you some names of people that I think would be good to look at. I don't think that this style artistically matches yours, but I think that the subject of humor and how they're depicting it would be good for you to look at. One is the cartoonist Kate Beaton, wonderful brief panel comics that are really quickly drawn. The humor is done so well. Also, check out Monty Python's Flying Circus. You have some scenarios and settings that I think could help push you further. One is they take the trope of a chaotic biker gang in the neighborhood, but it's a bunch of old grannies, and they're running around hitting people with purses. And that's an example where the character of the granny is not funny in itself. It's the situation that makes it funny, as far as how you're building your humor into these images. Edward Steed is the only good New Yorker cartoonist, apart from Will McPhail. Edward Steed has a really good line quality, and I think you'd resonate with it, but also the humor is just so non sequitur, out of the blue, and similarly to Kate Beaton, very successfully done in even one or two images. Your work is really spectacular. You've gone so much in the past 8 years being a professional illustrator, and you've made such amazing works. And I think in going forward, you have a really good sense of what your work needs. Focus on incorporating backgrounds with the characters. You need to keep pushing the color from great to even better, and getting that sense of humor in there would really take it to the next level. Thank you so much for sharing your work with me. It was fantastic to go through.